This is sick. Put this to music. I don't think he stepped out either. That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen.
Welcome back to Clawbreaks. This one is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be a bit of a prelude into our fantasy break for this year. So for those of you who are involved, we've got 2 fantasy breaks put together. So what we're going to do is a little bit of a fantasy NFL draft, which will be a bit of fun. And then based on the regular season output, we're going to actually do a break, a big break at the end of the year with about £4,800 worth of product thrown into it based on the results of the NFL. So it's almost like a cash draft, but it's going to be a little bit more fun because there's still a lot of luck that needs to be put in there. But anyway, look, welcome along. This is just going to be a quick overview, some basic ideas for those who haven't been involved in a fantasy football league before, and just an opportunity for you guys to learn the very basics, get you on the road to the right path to do well in this, but ultimately just to help you have a little bit more fun and a little bit more guidance. Obviously the groups are put together in the WhatsApp groups. Feel free to ask any questions you have there. If you want to message me directly, happy to do so too. There's a real big variety of experience across both groups, but to be honest with you, you can do very, very well as a newbie in these things, particularly in a 16-man draft or 16-team draft, because there's so much to do there. Anyway, let's kick off. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to be looking over today. There's going to be a bit of coverage of what we do. So notice the old NFL terminology here. We're just going to do a bit of fantasy football 101. You know, what are the basics, what to look out for, what's important and what's at stake. We're going to go through a little bit of pre-draft game planning, what you need to do in advance of draft day, what we're going to do in draft, basic strategies. Let me just clarify. Basic strategies. I highly recommend you go off onto YouTube and try and find 100 other places to find information from, but this will give you a very basic guideline about where to start. And then very basic as well, post draft and in season, what do we do from week to week basis, and then some ideas about resources. But if you are watching this on YouTube, just in the comments add some resources that you guys like. If there's any particular podcast or YouTubers that you guys watch, by all means please share them, because this is just meant to be a bit of fun more than anything. All right, the format, just so everybody is aware of our fantasy NFL draft, there is 16 teams in each league. That is the max that we can have. Actually, I think you can potentially go more, but 16 is what we're going to do. The draft will be system random, which means that nobody will know what the draft order is going to be in advance. But 30 minutes before the draft starts, the draft center will open and you will see what draft position you have. It is completely random. I have absolutely no influence over what that's going to be. You could be position 1, you could be position 16, but don't give me shit if it's not a position that you want. Look, there's pros and cons, and we'll go through this a little bit later about pros and cons of being at the front of the draft and the back of the draft, and again, very different to an 8-man draft. So that's what we are. In the draft, you will be drafting 1 quarterback for your starting team. So sorry, this is the starting team, but in total you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15 people in total. But your starting team will have 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, which is typically either running back or wide receiver, 1 kicker, and 1 defensive team. And we'll go through the scoring systems for each of those. You'll also have 6 people on your bench, which are basically your subs. There are some additional nuances about reserves, but to be honest with you, I'm not 100% certain as to who goes into reserve, who doesn't. I think it more has to do with COVID and someone goes onto a COVID list or rather than IR or anything like that. So be aware that our regular season is week 1 to 15. There are 18 fantasy weeks. I know there's only 17 weeks of games. but there is a bye week in the middle of all that for the teams. The bye week changes from week to week, so there's actually 18 fantasy weeks. So the victory will mean that the top 8 teams after week 15 will go into playoffs, and the winner of that will get a championship ring. So we will be making a physical championship ring to give to the champion of each of the 2 fantasy groups. But probably more importantly, your league position after week 15 is your draft position for the fantasy break. So if you finish week 15 and you are in number 1 position, you will have number 1 pick in the draft. If you finish in position 16, you'll have the 16th pick in the draft. And as you know, in that draft, you will each have 2 opportunities to pick a team, and that will be your team. It'll be a reverse snake draft as well. So if you're position 1, you will have pick 1 and pick 32. If you're position 16, you'll have position or pick 16 and pick 17. And this is for the actual break itself. So the date of the break is yet to be confirmed. It'll probably be the weekend before the Super Bowl, I would suspect, during Pro Bowl time, but we can probably change that if the groups want to change that. But they're the two things to win here: the championship ring for all the glory, and then obviously your position in fantasy break. So fingers crossed, you can have a shot at both of those. But lots of good teams. The boxes that we have so far. So we have 2 2019 boxes. We've got 1 2020 box. We've got a helmet, we've got jerseys, and I'm, to be honest with you, I'm just avoiding a lot of the collegiate stuff at the moment, waiting for more 2021. So a majority of the stuff will be 2021. I'm hoping there'll be somewhere between 8 and 12 hobby boxes in there. It all depends on the prices I can get them. So I'm avoiding collegiate, going for pro, and trying to get them all at decent prices so we can get more in there as possible. Both groups will have the same boxes, same product. It's just a question of getting lucky and making sure that or hoping that your box actually has some bangers in it or not. Anyway, so that's the format, and I keep things nice and simple. So the scoring, we are using default league scoring. So these are the scores, the scoring system that the out of the box NFL draft or NFL fantasy drafts have. No additional scoring has been put there. There is a whole rake of options to add additional points in there, but I thought that's not fair. I think everybody should have exactly the same level playing field. It is a PPR league, which I'll explain a little bit more in a second. But you can see a full list of the scoring in the app. They're not all here. I've put some of them in, okay? So on the offense, typically, but you will get, for every 25 yards that your QB passes, he'll get a point. So if he throws 150 yards in a game, he'll get 6 points. If he passes for a touchdown, he'll get 4 points. And if he throws an interception, there'll be 2 points deducted. So you want to keep an eye out on that. So I think Matty Ice had a ton of yardage last year, but he had quite a lot of interceptions. And a couple of other top guys had the same thing, so we want to keep an eye on that. On the rushing side, your quarterback, if he runs, he will get 1 point for every 10 yards, as will your running backs, which is hugely important. And rushing touchdowns, you'll get 6 points. So in this case, if a quarterback passes for a touchdown, gives it to somebody else, and he, like via pass, he'll get 4 points. If he runs it himself, he'll get 6 points. If he gives it to a running back, he gets no points, but the running back will get 6 points, if that makes sense, okay? So this is a PPR league, and what that means is points per reception, okay, which is a bit different to a non-PPR league, which is, to be honest, hugely weighted in favor of running backs. There's already a heavy influence on that because there's such short supply for top end running backs. But what this means is each one of your wide receivers will get 1 point for every reception that they've received as well. So if they get targeted 12 points in a game, and they catch all 12 of those catches, they will get 12 points. They will also get 1 point for every 10 yards that they move forward from the stick. So if somebody hits a 60-yard run, catches it, he'll get 61 points. So 1 for the reception, and then 6 points for the 60 yards, and potentially touchdown points if they actually get any touchdowns. On the offensive side as well, so a pad is 1 point. So after touchdown is scored, if the kicker converts the 1 point after, they will get 1 point for your team. A field goal from almost anywhere is 3 points, but if the field goal is more than 50 yards, they'll actually get 5 points just because of the additional difficulty on those. They'll get 2 points for a 2-point conversion as well. The QB and the receiver will get 2 points for a 2-point conversion. Remember, negative points are in play. So if you lose a fumble, if you fumble, it's fine if you recapture it, but if you lose a fumble and it goes to the other team, it's 2 points deducted. And also, if your running back or your quarterback gets stuffed, absolutely stuffed when they try to run and break, they will get negative yardage as well. So quite often you'll see running backs who don't make the gain line get put back in their asses, will get points deducted on them. So that's again for every, I think it's for every 10 yards they get a negative point as well, not per yard. Although I have to double check that. I think that's the case. Right, on defense, you only have one defensive line in your team, so it's kind of important. It can make a difference, but it's not the biggest thing to remember. When you'll see in the draft strategy that the defenses are typically much further down the track than any of the other positions. But defense, you get 1 point per sack. You'll get 2 points for every interception. You'll get 2 points for every fumble recovered. If they force a safety, it's 2 points. If they score a touchdown in defense, it's 6 points. And if they stop a 2 point, they'll also get 2 points as well. Beyond that, then, if they score a touchdown, it's 6 points from on the kickoff or punt return. But one of the things that you'll see is at the start of a game, you'll have 10 points automatically because no points have been scored. But throughout the game, as we go down through this section down here, assuming you can see my mouse, depending on the amount of points that they've allowed, equates the number of points that they score as a team for your fantasy football team. So if you take a look at the likes of the Atlanta Falcons, score a huge amount of points on offense, but just typically give a ton away in defense, they're going to have a terrible defensive score because they'll end up with -4 points. And this is where it could really hurt you towards your end of week score. So defense isn't hugely important, but you also don't want to be lumped with the worst defenses in the league because you will be in big trouble when it comes to scoring. So we'll come through a little bit more ideas around that later on, but we'll talk about that then. Next up, pre-draft. So some tips and tricks about what you do pre-draft in advance of the day. So the first thing I'd say is do your research. There is a ton of resources out there. I can show you a couple of those in a minute. But you do want to try and do as much research as you can. Don't just go with your gut. Don't just go with the players who you've seen in past years and said, oh, they're a good player, I'm going to go with them. Have a look at the statistics. Have a look at how many yards they've carried for, how many fumbles they've had, how many points they've scored. Try and understand if they had injuries last year or that may have impacted those numbers. For example, make sure that you don't pick somebody who's injured this year. So Cam Akers looked like he was going to be on fire, but he's injured now. So previously he would have been a very high draft pick. Now he's going to be like a non-existent draft pick because he's effectively out for the season, although inevitably somebody's probably going to pick them because that's always going to be the case. But doing your research is hugely important. I mean, there's loads of videos, there's loads of podcasts. We'll get into some of those later. But the more you do, the better position you will be, the better you'll be at understanding what needs to be done. So yeah, look, watch lots of videos on players. So as I said, on YouTube, there are, like, this is $1 billion industry in the US. There are YouTube videos everywhere. There's paid people who paid services to help you draft, all those different things. But there's just so many resources that you can do when it comes to draft strategies as well. Most people will be in an 8-person league and it's fairly straightforward. So if you pick at 1, the next pick you have is at pick 16. In a 16-person league, if you pick number 1, your second pick is going to be at 32. That means 30 other players will be gone before you get a chance to have your second pick, right? So the strategy that you will have at the number 1 pick will be very different to the strategy that you have at the 16 pick, be very different to the strategy that you have at the 8 pick. So do a lot of research around this. Try and understand where it's important to draft people, and don't always go for the names, name recognition, right? The other thing I'd say is try and identify all the players that you want to draft. I'm not just talking about your top 10, because if you take the top 10 positions and your running back, your wide receiver, and your tight end, like you're gonna have 30 players there, right? Running back, quarterback, tight end, and wide receivers. That's 40 players, right? that's less than 2 rounds. So they're going to be halfway through the first 2 rounds, and most of those people are going to be gone. So you've got to start thinking about picks beyond the first and second round. You've got to start thinking about those middle players, sort of around 5, round 6, trying to get those extra wide receivers and running backs. So every running back and wide receiver, for example, are going to be very different situations. So the question is, are you picking the right person on the right team at the right time? But then also, what value are you getting for that person? So like, if you're a big fan of, say, Matheson, right, who's currently the number 2 running back in the Vikings, you're not going to pick him in the first round because there's going to be far more valuable people to pick. But if you can pick up Matheson in, say, the 13th or 14th round, I think that's a sensational pick, because he's going to back up Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook goes down, bang, you've suddenly got an RB1 in the 17th to 18th pick. So ADP is something you're going to see in the mock draft area. That's the average draft position for that player. So the ADP is basically telling you globally, where is that person being picked, or where is that player being picked. So it's typically a good guide. I know I did a mock draft earlier on, which I'll show you later on, and it wasn't perfect because Cam Akers, for example, was still in there, like pick 23 or something like that. So it's kind of pointless picking him at 23 because he's injured. So just take it with a pinch of salt. Make sure you do your research, okay? For each one of your picks, you're going to have somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds. I think 90 seconds is what we've put into the thing, but given it's such a big draft, we may bring that down to a minute. But you got to pick your sort of top 20 in order and try and figure out where they are. Now you can do that either on paper. A lot of people like doing it the manual way, or you can actually build it out in a into your draft rankings that you can do actually in the NFL app as well. So we can talk about that. But anyway, identify all the players in the draft with a priority for each position. So try and figure out who's going to be more important. So if X running back is available at the same time as Y wide receiver, which one are you going to pick at that time? So it's kind of tricky to do. Will require a bit of work, but it's definitely worth it. But the big thing you can do after you've done all this is do many mock drafts, right? There's mock drafts available all the time in the NFL app that you're using. I think they're typically every 15 minutes. There's lots of different versions. There's 8-man, there's 12-man, there's 14-man, and everything in between. I haven't seen a 16-man one yet, so it's a little bit trickier, but try and do some 14 ones if you can. And do the 8-man one too, just to get a familiar, for those of you who aren't familiar with fantasy football, just to get familiar with the process and see where people are being picked. Some of those will be on auto draft, and some of them will be real people, but do try and do as many of those as you can. Inevitably, actually I'm not sure, I don't think you get scores on your mock draft and where they ended up. I think that's only for the real thing. But have a look through the draft and actually try and debate whether or not you did well, or have a look at other people's drafts and say, actually, he did much better picking that person at 13 than I did picking that person at 7, for example. So that'll give you a bit of a sense of what you need to do. So tip number 1 is look, advanced player research under the player app section of the app. I'll go into it in a second, but it allows you to do, there's my dog barking in the background. I'm not sure if you can hear her, but it'll give you a little bit more understanding about who to check, but then also beyond that, check team depth charts as well. So, a lot will have happened in the offseason. I guarantee you players from the teams that will have moved. Your previous wide receiver 1 may no longer be wide receiver 1, may have moved on to a team, maybe injured, maybe wide receiver 2. An example of that would be Van Jefferson, for example. I was convinced was going to be wide receiver 3, but they brought in another wide receiver, so he's back to wide receiver 4. So he may not be a good pick or a good potential pickup for this year. Who knows? It just all depends on injuries, etc. in that team. So do have a look at that. And then tip number 2 is follow key people on Twitter. So Ian Rappaport typically is the NFL insider with all the gossip and insights. So if somebody's injured, if somebody is not going to make a game for whatever reason, he's usually the first person to see inside. During week, there is a lot of information in app as well. So there's updates on injuries, etc. as well, and so just stay up to date with all the information that's in the app. All right, let me just show you quickly the player section of the app, because that's usually a good way to see everything that's going on. So if you go into your fantasy NFL, for example, here we go. So if you click on fantasy NFL, so this is what it looks like when you start. click on fantasy football, and then click on players. Players, there we go. Then you will get a list of all these things. There is another section up here in research, but I would just skip that one, to be honest with you, because this is easier to navigate. So if you're looking at the 2020 season, you're going to have a look at all the different positions, which you can see across the board here, and the points that they scored last year, but more importantly, you know, passing, rushing, receiving, everything that's there. So we're going to start with the QBs, for example. If you want to go overall offense, you can see Josh Allen was the highest scorer, Alvin Kamara was number 2, and Aaron Rodgers number 3. But let's go with quarterbacks just to use this as an example. Aaron Rodgers was the MVP last year. He didn't have the most amount of yards. He was a couple hundred yards off. He did have a ton of touchdowns, probably the top number of touchdowns. But the biggest reason why he was MVP last year was because of his fumbles, which was only 2, but his interceptions was only 5. So a huge amount of touchdowns, very few interceptions. But the difference between his fantasy points and Josh Allen's fantasy points was Josh Allen scored more touchdowns himself, rushing, and he also had more yards in the bag. So Josh Allen will no doubt be one of the higher people being taken off the board this year. Aaron Rodgers, funny enough, is actually quite far down the order this year. That may just have been a little bit of nervousness just around him committing to Green Bay this year, so that may update now that he's committed. Kyler Murray I had last year. He was an absolute dream. Biggest thing about him, he doesn't throw a huge amount of yardage. 4,000 yards is still quite a lot. Doesn't throw a huge amount of touchdowns, but he does score an awful lot of touchdowns. And look how much rushing he did. He did 819 yards in rushing. Like, that is huge for a quarterback. So as you can see, only 17 points difference. So the top five QBs there were all only 25 points between them. And the big thing I'd say is when you look at these historic numbers, again, don't rely on historic numbers. So Deshaun Watson here, for example, 374 points last year, very far down the depth, down the chart this year. And the reason being that there's a big question over whether or not he's going to remain in Houston, but then also he's lost one of his best wide receivers. So is he going to throw up another 4,800 yards this year? Probably not. I'd say it's highly unlikely. If he stays in Houston, like, he's definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But you know, aside from his off-field exploits, is probably the best way to describe it. But potentially he's also going to be traded. So you know, if he gets a trade to another team, is he going to have a higher or lower number? Anything could happen over the next 3 weeks. So let's say Broncos. Broncos need a quarterback. If he went to the Broncos, would he up his numbers? Probably. You know, the Broncos are ready to receive a really good quarterback. But if he goes to I don't know, if he went to the Raiders or someone like that, do you think he'd have as high numbers? Probably not. I just don't think they have as good an offense as someone like the Broncos, and he's not going to go anywhere else. So that's the one thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is don't forget about the guys further down. So a great example would be let's say Kirk Cousins. Right, Kirk Cousins is pretty. It reminds me of what's that film In Bruges, and they describe purgatory, and they say purgatory is like Spurs. He's basically purgatory for QBs. So like, he's not great, and he's not bad either. Like, he's pretty Mr. Consistent. But the difference between picking up him in probably the 10th round of the draft versus Mahomes, who might go in the 2nd or 3rd, or same with Josh Allen, he might go in the 3rd. He has much greater value. I mean, there's not a huge amount of difference between him and Russell Wilson or Deshaun. There's 50 points over a season of 18 games or 17 games. I mean, that's 3 points a game. May or may not be the difference maker. But if you can pick a higher scoring running back, for example, higher up the board, and then pick up Kirk further down in the draft, you're doing really, really well. So that's an example of that. You can go through that. You can go through your running backs, your wide receivers, your tight ends, all these different things, and you'll get a real sense of who the top candidates are going to be for that coming year, for sure. And then, as I say, you can go through your projections. So this is like what do the books say the projections are going to be, fantasy points per game. This is per game. This is what they suspect or suggest is going to be this year. So yeah, you got to take this with a pinch of salt as well, because Deshaun Jackson, I'm not convinced he's going to be high up that board. I think Josh Allen's going to be higher up there. I think Lamar is going to be further down. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be further up. If you look at the running backs, your running backs are probably accurate. Well, Alvin Kamara, I think Christian McCaffrey will probably go 1 in most leagues. Alvin Kamara is definitely going to be up there. Dalvin Cook probably be number 2. And then these guys down here probably not so much. Saquon's probably going to go 5, even though he's much further down the drafting. He'll probably miss the first game or 2, but he's definitely somebody you'd want to be picking up. And then as you go through all these different positions, then you're in a good space. The WRs, your flex position, it just helps you picking between running back and wide receiver. We don't have an extended defensive league, so we don't need LBs or DBs. But the defense here, again, you can try and make a sort of a good stab at who you think is going to be the top guys. Now they say, what do they have here? They think Green Bay is going to be top defense. Now I'd be very surprised if you don't see the Rams up there much higher. Wow, where are the Rams? The Rams are right down here. Wow. Yeah, I would have thought the Rams would be much higher up. But as you can see, there's not going to be a huge difference. Actually, if we go back to the stats, if you go back to defense from last year. Offense, defense, okay. Yeah, so 149 for the Rams, Steelers 148, Colts 143, Washington probably improved from last year, 127, Ravens 141. So these are the points that they all had last year. So yeah, inevitably Rams will probably be high up there. Tampa Bay got really strong towards the end of the year last year, so I suspect that they'll probably be higher up the track this year. So again, you gotta do your research here and try and make an assumption about where you think these guys are going to drop. Right. All right. Back to this, and we will go through the rest of the presentation. All right. So draft, the rules. I'm going to say these are general rules. These will definitely be broken, but these are kind of more guidelines than anything for people who are new to draft and what to expect. So typically running backs are the priority, or rather elite running backs are the priority. The reason being there are not that many elite running backs for run heavy offenses as well. Those guys can pull in a ton of points for you. I think we saw earlier on Alvin Kamara, for example, was the second highest points scorer in fantasy last year. He ran riot. I had him on my team. I was very very happy with that. But the likes of Christian McCaffrey, he didn't score a huge amount last year, but he is back fit and healthy after being injured last year, so he should be in a really good position. Dalvin Cook had a really good year last year, so hopefully that'll continue. And then surprisingly, the likes of Ezekiel Elliott, who would have been really high on the boards last year, had a nightmare of a year. Now you can potentially blame the injury of Dak Prescott on that, but I'm not sure if you can really do that. Maybe he just got fat and lazy because of the massive contract he got the previous year. But yeah, you gotta have a look at those top guys. Saquon, definitely one of the best running backs of the league, but he's just come off a massive injury last year and basically missed all of last season. He looks good, but is he gonna be game ready? Is he gonna be able to hit the ground running? To use old adage. So running backs are typically the priority, but once you go outside the top 5, 6, 7, the question is, are you better off going for one of the elite or wide receivers? So if you're talking about the likes of Devontae Adams, for example, definitely going to be one of the top wide receivers in the year this year, or this year with the relationship with Aaron Rodgers. And there's a whole host of other guys in there as well who you're going to be looking at and going, those guys are going to be the ones who are going to be targeted the most. Now, the one thing I would say is Justin Jefferson obviously had a sensational year last year, and he would likely be an early round pick this year. But you have to bear in mind the dynamics on those teams. So, he was wide receiver 2 last year. He's definitely going to be wide receiver 1 this year. And is he going to be under double coverage a lot? And if he is under double coverage, is he going to be able to still produce the amount of numbers that we know he's capable of? But is he going to be able to get free? Is he going to have 2 people hanging out of him all the time? Is that going to stop him from producing? So these are the kind of the things that you need to think about. Tight ends, the same thing. So, Travis Kelce, absolute epic tight end. It typically goes off the boards pretty early. But then the question is, where do you weight the tight ends over the wide receivers and the running backs. So, you know, outside of the top 3 tight ends, you know, it's kind of becomes a little bit negligible. Kyle Pitts will be an interesting one, you know, touted as being a future Hall of Famer as a rookie, just because he was the 4th pick in the draft. You know, is he going to be able to produce? You know, he's in a quite an enviable position where he is, but I mean, as a rookie, there's a huge amount of pressure, and a lot of rookies are really struggling in year one. If you think about last year, yes, there was probably about 10 rookies who were way in ahead of everybody else, but there was another, you know, 90 rookies who effectively were forgotten after the first couple of weeks. So rookies are a punt, but if you find the right rookie, it's definitely worth looking at. So yeah, QBs, typically a vast majority of QBs will go in round 4+. The reason being that the priority or the difficulty to get good running backs and wide receivers will take precedence. That said, I can guarantee you Mahomes will go early. I can guarantee you Josh Allen will go early. And yeah, depending on who you fancy and what situation that you're in, there's a lot of QBs that'll go early. But as you'll see later on, there's 2 drafts I'm going to show you. One was one that I wasn't involved in, just so you can see where you know, completely real draft with lots of real pickers, what that looks like. And then there was one that I just did earlier on today, and I was going to show you the value that you can pick up late rounds as well. So you know, for me, I will typically pick up a quarterback late in a draft, because there's not going to be a massive difference unless you're picking some of the top guys. There's not going to be a massive difference between the guys from 4 to 12 or 4 to 16. It really depends. You know, we really need to have a bit of luck, to be honest with you. There we go. Yeah, so kickers and defense. If I see anybody picking a kicker or defense before round 12, you know, you're just going to get solidly abused, because they're not going to be your biggest point scorers. As you can see, your defense will be probably about half the amount of your top running back or wide receiver. There's a ton of them as well, so there's like obviously 32 defenses. You only need 1, and there's only 16 teams, so you know you're going to get a top 16 pick most likely anyway. Kickers, yeah, some maybe go a little bit higher for certain kickers, but again, you know, they're not going to have as big a contribution to your fantasy football team as you think. So as I said, do understand that a 16-team league is very, very different to an 8-team league. If you do some mock drafts, you will find out very, very quickly that is the case, where in a mock draft you could probably pick up in the first 3 rounds, sorry, in an 8-team league, in the first 3 rounds you'll probably pick up 3 really good players. If you're in a 16-team league, you'll be lucky to get a second really good player. You'll probably get one all right, but the second one's going to be really, really tough to get, because there's just more teams and there's more players being picked, which is why your depth of knowledge is going to be hugely important. Things to bear in mind when you're drafting as well is bye weeks. So every team will have a bye week. I think the earliest is week 6, but I could be corrected. But the last thing you want to do is pick, 10 players and they're all in the same week. They're all in the same bye week of week 6 or whatever, and then suddenly you get to week 6 and you're like, shit, I need to actually trade out my entire team to actually have a team to play on the field on the day. So just bear that in mind. If you're very heavy in a certain week, you don't want to roster churn your entire team and have one really bad week, but definitely worth bearing in mind. As I said, the last year's points are not a guarantee of next year's points. A lot of cases, the top players will either have been injured and their score won't appear. So Christian McCaffrey, for example, he won't appear on the board if you're basing it solely on points, because he was injured for a lot of last year. But he has a huge amount of potential this year. Be wary of rookie hype, as I said, and then always have a plan B. So do, especially later on in the later rounds, try and start picking up certain players that'll help your team just in case. So if you're we'll go into a little bit of strategy later on, but for example, handcuffing certain players. So if you get Saquon Barkley, pick up Booker as a backup. Saquon Barkley goes down, then at least you have the RB1 who's going to be coming into the team for the Giants. Stacking is another strategy as well. So if you think let me get an example. If you think Aaron Rodgers is going to throw another 4,000 yards this year. You know, who's he going to throw those 4,000 yards for? Or two? Probably Devontae Adams is going to be your wide receiver number one, but you know, Tanyan might be your go-to tight end. So if you stack your team heavy in favor of that relationship, and you think that's going to do well, then chances are, but if they do well, you're going to be in a really good position because they're all going to be helping each other out. So you're basically doubling down on a certain set. So like, there's lots of examples of that across the league if you think about any of the big teams. So decide on where you want to go. Right, come back to basic strategy. We kind of went through a little bit there, so I might skip through this fairly quickly, but the first thing to do is to arrive to the draft lobby early, so 30 minutes before. If memory serves me right, our drafts are going to be the weekend before the regular season. They are going to be starting at 8 o'clock British time, so the draft lobby will be open from 7:30 p.m. British time. That may need to change because I have a 2.5-year-old and he typically goes down just before 8 o'clock, so I may need to change that a little bit later. But I have to try and figure that one out myself, because yeah, I can't really miss the start of the draft. That'd be an absolute disaster unless I can do it on my mobile phone while I'm upstairs. Yeah, we can figure all that out. Hopefully that'll be the case. So yeah, arrive to the draft lobby early. You're going to get an opportunity to start flagging the players that you want to flag, and also be a bit of chat in that group as well, so it should be a bit of fun. But do that and do be prepared. Make sure everything is working. I highly recommend doing it on a PC or a laptop if you can. You can do it on your phone, but when you're trying to flick through lots of different players, trying to read stuff, it's usually much easier to do it on a laptop. So do that. Do avoid auto draft. So if you don't arrive on time and or you don't pick a player within the allotted time, you will automatically go on to auto draft, which means normally, if I'm not completely wrong, it'll pick the highest ADP player, so the average draft pick player. Now, one of my friends did this in a league before and he ended up with 5 quarterbacks because they were the highest ADP players that were left on the board. He had a terrible season because of it, but he did end up doing a couple of decent trades out of it as well. So yeah, look, just avoid an auto draft. Make sure you're there on time, make sure you're there to pick, and make sure you pick within your allotted 90 seconds. 90 seconds is what I have there. I need to do the math on how long that'll actually take. Just as a good order though, if you know who you're going to pick next, just don't wait the 90 seconds, just pick them straight away, because we want to get this thing done as quickly as possible. This is probably going to be about an hour and a half of a full draft, if not a little bit more. So let's be quick on these things. 90 seconds is available to everybody because you're going to need to do a little bit of work on certain things, but particularly in the early rounds, just be ready and let's just pick quickly so we can get through it as quickly as we can. All right, as I said, have a strategy for each of the draft positions. You're going to know what your position is in that pre-draft lobby. So as I said, it is a random selection of the order that the system will be doing. So depending on where you land in that lobby, have a think about what you're going to do. But in advance, I would recommend having a plan for if you are number 1 or 2 or 3 versus where you are in the middle versus where you are at the end, because that'll have a big impact on what you're going to be doing in the draft for sure. Right, do try and get elite anchors. So I did talk about earlier on about trying to get value from ADP, where if you pick somebody lower down that you think will outperform, that's an opportunity to get more points. But inevitably you will need a top wide receiver, you will need a top running back, or you will need a top QB to be the anchor for your team. So if you get to say 16, if you're spot 16 and you have all the absolute top guys are taken and there is nobody left on the board, the wide receiver that you think is an absolute baller, then maybe Mahomes is your right strategy there. I wouldn't recommend it because I still think that you're going to be getting, if you wait until the next round to get a decent running back or wide receiver, you're going to have even less quality players there. So it's a decision that you're going to have to make, but do try and get the best player that you possibly can in one of those skill positions, because it's hugely important. Next up then, as I said, seek value. So ADP for your forecast. This is kind of more important for later on rounds. So ideally sort of when you get down to sort of 10 plus, round 10 plus, if you can pick up somebody who you think has huge upside, so whether it be a backup running back, or if you think it'd be a backup quarterback, if you think somebody's going to go down, it could be your Jacob Easons of the world. You know, can't imagine Jacob Eason's going to be selected very early in the game or in the draft, and if he's still available in 10 or 11, you know, potentially he's got a good upside there. It really depends on what the injury is going to look like for his counterpart. So have a look there and see where you're going to go, and try and pick up value where you can. And as I said on the last slide, you know, in later rounds, don't try, but if it's a strategy you want to go by, some people don't want to do this at all, but you know, handcuffing and stacking is typically a good idea, because if you have a top running back and they get injured, you know, somebody else could pick up the reserve or the RB2, and then you'd be screwed, because that RB2 automatically will become an RB1. They probably won't be as good as the RB1, but they'll definitely get production, they'll definitely get points, and it's definitely one to keep an eye on going forward. So yeah, the other thing I'd say is, you know, more tips here is bowlers aren't always your best pick due to double coverage. So I gave the example of Justin Jefferson earlier on. You know, all your top guys are going to get covered. You know, running back's a little bit different, but your wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb's going to be covered. All the guys who did really, really well last year, they're going to be very, very, very difficult to produce numbers. There's always going to be those middle tier guys, wide receiver 2s, who are going to be producing big numbers, just because the focus of the defense is going to be on somebody else. So try and bear that in mind. You know, ADP should only be a resource, not an influence. So, you know, it's there to give you an idea of what other people are thinking, but inevitably the best decisions will not be made with the masses. So do have your own interpretation of what is possible with the players. As I said, ADP is just an indication of what's being done. Don't forget the bye weeks, and politics is another thing that I'm just going to throw in there as well. So, you know, if you're talking about either new QBs or old QBs, you know, old QBs who've been in a system for the last 10 years are gonna continue throwing to the guys that they know really well. So, like, very simply, if you look at like Brady throwing to Gronk all the time, if you're looking at Aaron Rodgers throwing to Devontae Adams all the time, you know, they've built up this relationship over years. But likewise, if you've got Tua throwing to Waddle, you know, they played together before. They'll know each other's systems, even though Waddle's a new player, so that's possible. Likewise, there may be falling outs that we're not entirely aware of. So somebody may be an absolutely sensational wide receiver, but if he's pissed off his QB's going to potentially throw somewhere else. So do be aware of politics in the background as well. Right, next up, here's an example. I know it's probably going to be a bit blurry for you guys on screen, but hopefully you'll be able to see it. This was a live draft from Fantasy Coach, Fantasy Couch, beg your pardon, who is in position number 4. This was a 14-man draft, and in fairness, I don't think it went particularly bad for him. I think they got some really, really good players, but I give you an example of the type of position and where people picked things, and there were some surprises in this when I watched it, but then again, a lot of it kind of went to plan as well. So obviously your top 5, the 5 we talked about earlier on, McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, Henry and Barkley. Elliott, I was surprised he went so high. A lot of people think he's got huge potential. Like, he had a massive year 2 years ago and 3 years ago, but just last year he fell off the face of the planet. John Taylor had a really good year. Devontae Adams was the first wide receiver picked, for obvious reasons. He was in pick 7. Then it went back to running backs in Jones and Chubb. I think Chubb's quite good. And then in the wide receiver went to Hill and Diggs. Diggs had a sensational year last year again. Great relationship with Josh Allen, and so on and so forth. So Kelsey went in position 12. Very high for a tight end, but there's certain players, like the elite tight ends are Kelsey, Waller and Kittle. Those guys will produce numbers, so they're effectively the same as a wide receiver when it comes to output, but it's in one of those positions where there aren't huge scores to be put up. But yeah, going back to wide receivers, then there's a couple of running backs brought in Like Najee Harris, obviously a very talented running back, but big questions over his offensive line and whether or not they can actually create holes for him to run through. So that was a very risky pick when I saw that. Antonio Gibson's kind of proven himself in Washington. Justin Jefferson, obviously some risk around him, but he is an elite wide receiver. Edwards-Helaire, I was surprised by that one as well, because he had a good start to the season last year, but towards the middle and end of the season didn't do much. And then look, you can make the same argument for a lot of the people going through here. Now, Fantasy Couch did pick Mahomes in the second round. He just thought it was. If I go back and watch the video, you can watch it yourself. But I think he just thought it was too good an opportunity not to take Mahomes, and I think there was a bit of a fear that somebody beyond him here might have taken it as well. So he took Mahomes. They took wide receivers all the way around. As you can see, he doesn't have a wide receiver yet. And then Hawkinson was still on the board. So the top three guys were gone. Hawkinson had a great year last year. I think they were thinking between Hawkinson and Pitts. I think Pitts is higher up on the ADP. But he was a big producer in Detroit last year. Again, almost operates as a wide receiver when it comes to production, so that's where he was picked. Flash forward, Allen and Murray, the other top two QBs, were taken in the third round. Some more rookies like Etienne were taken in the fourth round. Lamar Jackson is a good sort of running, passing quarterback, so you're going to get some points similar to Kyler Murray, although Kyler Murray is much better than Jackson in my opinion. Then you got Wilson. Prescott was a bit of a punt, but there was strange in this group. There was a lot of QBs. There was 8 QBs taken by the end of round 4, but most of them were taken in round 4, so worth looking at. But at this stage, they took Thielen. Thielen is obviously a very good wide receiver. Going to work very well. Good relationship with Kirk Cousins. T. Higgins in Cincinnati, going to work well with Joe Burrow for sure. And as we go through these, so Tannehill probably also a good fit. Darrell Henderson was taken in the 4th round. It's interesting because I'll show you in the next one. Anyway, I'm gonna go through this later, but as you go through, I'm going to speed through the rest of this. Sorry, but as you go through this, it was kind of fairly standard. Couple of surprises in the first 4 rounds. Then as you go through 5, 6, 7, you kind of build up your second stack of wide receivers and running backs just as backups. Then typically you'll go back to your QB and your a backup tight end. Interestingly, the Buccaneers were taken here in round, what is that, 8? Yeah, round 9. But that was 3 rounds before the next person took a defensive line, so that was a bit of a strange take for the Buccaneers. Likewise, the Rams were taken after the Steelers. Steelers are interesting. They decided to do that. Anyway, so Troutman, Parker, Brown, Stevens, then Washington here were taken in the 13th round there. Randall Cobb, which I thought was a great pickup. Darrington Evans and Robinson then as their last pick. So these were all quality picks. Now I do notice that they didn't pick or maybe I missed a line. Did I miss a line? Doesn't look like they picked a kicker. No, they didn't pick a kicker. So what they actually did here was they picked the best players that they could, because kickers are largely unimportant, and I think the top guys were taken at that stage. So your Justin Tuckers and your Kuz at that time. So they were like, well, you know what, let's just pick the best that we can based on the board, and then afterwards we can go off the waiver wire and pick up somebody in the after trades. So as I said, kicker is not a key position. So they said let's focus on the key positions first and then go back, and that's potentially something that we can do as well. So yeah, look, I suppose the point here is that Mahomes was taken in the 2nd round, Allen and Murray in the 3rd round, but if you go right down the end, there's some great pickups further down the road. Look, Jones, you're out on him or you're not, but I think potentially he'll have a good season this year. Tua potentially have a good season in that space down there. Then you've got, Mac Jones as a backup, which is interesting. Deshaun Watson was in the 2nd, 4, 6, 8, 9, 9th round. Deshaun Watson in the 9th round. Cousins in the 8th round. Matt Ryan, who'll throw up a huge amount of numbers this year again in the 8th round. Trey Lance as option. Hurts, I wouldn't pick Hurts at all in anywhere near the top 10 rounds, to be honest with you. Lawrence is worth the punt. He'll throw stuff around. Stafford has some offensive opportunity again in round 5, and Burrow as well, hopefully if he stays healthy, and interesting enough Tannehill as well. Tannehill Mayfield in 5 and 6. But the point being that, look, if you don't get a quarterback that you want, the top 3 quarterbacks, there's some great quarterbacks you're going to be able to pick up in round 4 and 5. So anyway, that was in the sleeper app. That's not the app that we're going to be using. It just happened to be the only one that I could find with a high number of things. So this is a mock draft that I did earlier on. I was team 5, so position 5 in this draft. This is in the mock draft that you will get in the app. I've just split it into 2 here so you can see it. So it's highlighted in team 5 here. I picked up Barkley because the other 4 guys had gone at that stage. I think that was a good one. It was a long time before I had my next pick. A lot of the top guys had been taken, but I decided to go with Ridley. Great performance last year. Great chance to pick him up. Went round again, and then looking at my running backs, and realistically, I thought Montgomery was the best that was there, and then I thought there was going to be a big drop off until the next pick came back round again, which is exactly what happened. So Mahomes went in the 2nd round, Allen went in the 3rd round, and Kyler didn't go until the 4th round in this one. I think the previous one they were both went in the 3rd. Going across, then there was Jackson and Prescott. Most people still hadn't gone with quarterbacks. I'm a big fan of Andrews. Potentially I could have gone with Hawkinson here, but I thought Andrews was the better pick. He's kind of solidified in that Ravens defense. I've had him for a little while last year, and I just don't like Detroit, so I didn't pick him there. But I picked up the tight end there, and then at that stage I was looking at everybody else that was left on the board, and potentially I went a bit early here, but I just thought Aaron Rodgers in the 6th round or the 5th round was just too good to give up. There was a couple of other good guys on the board there, but he's MVP last year. He threw up a stupid amount of numbers. He seems to have a bit of a chip on the shoulder. I don't like the guy, don't get me wrong. I think he's a child, but I think he's got a chip on the shoulder to prove that he is one of the best quarterbacks out there, and I think he's just got the relationships on that team to throw a big number. So I was quite happy with that pick up in 5. Going back around, then again, Brandon Cooks in round 6. I was stunned that I got him in round 6. He's going to be wide receiver 1 now in Houston, and I think it's a bit of a punt, because if Deshaun Watson leaves, then he's a little bit fucked. But I think if he stays, he's going to get an absolute ton of production. He's going to get lots of stuff. Next up, I picked Connor, and look, I'm going to be totally honest here. I kind of there's a 30-second pick cap or timing on each pick, and I got a little bit flustered, and I just fucking picked somebody. I shouldn't have picked Connor. I'm not a huge fan of his. He's going to be running back number 2 in Arizona as well, so I thought he was going to be running back number 1, but he obviously isn't. So that was a bit of a misstep. And the next time around, this was more deliberate, and I probably should have taken Matheson, or potentially could have taken Matheson earlier. But like Connor here, I could have gone with Johnson or Drake or any of these guys as a potential second. So actually Tanyan, that's what I should have done. I should have gone with Tanyan as a tight end. Big fan of Tanyan's. I had Rodgers, and you talk about stacking, I could have taken Tanyan instead of Connor. I should have done that one, because in the next round I got Matheson, and Matheson, my logic behind that was he's not going to score a huge amount of points unless Dalvin Cook gets injured. Now it's a bit grim that you start thinking that way around, but that's what I was thinking at this spot. There was nobody immediately in my eye line that I was looking at going, damn, I want to pick up those guys. So Matheson was the guy I picked. Then we went back round. I had a look at my coverage. I noticed I had 2 wide receivers. I hadn't picked up a 3rd one yet, so that's why I went with Ruggs. Again, probably better options that were available on the table, like Samuel. Chenault, I think, will have a good opportunity, or a good season. Waddle could have been a bit of a punt, but I do like him again. Potentially better than Ruggs, who'll have limited production under Carr, I think. So he's just a really good football. I wish Ruggs was somewhere else. But anyway, I picked up Ruggs there. Panicked a little bit with the Cardinals in defense at that stage as well. Probably could have held off a little bit longer, but I think there was a couple of defenses taken off in the previous 2 rounds, and I was like, sugar, I better pick up somebody now, although that should be a lot later on. And yeah, at that stage, to be honest with you, I was kind of, if I'm honest, I was eating my lunch and I was a bit distracted by what was going on, so then I just picked a couple of ones because I was losing interest. So I picked up Siebert down here. Kirk Cousins is my backup quarterback, as I said, great value. Much further down the the draft. Sanders, I thought was a good value down there as well. Booker was my handcuff to Saquon Barkley. So if Barkley went down, at least I had Booker to cover me. And then straight enough, I picked backers in the last round as well. So yeah, look, I think overall that was a fairly decent draft. Not sure what I'd grade myself. Probably a B, maybe a B plus there. I think there's opportunities where I could have gotten a lot more strength in that team, but I think that's a team that would consistently challenge from week to week, for sure. Well, assuming everybody's safe, fit, and healthy, and maybe excluding week 1 because I'm not sure if Barkley's going to be back from week 1. But yeah, okay. So you've done your draft. We're talking about in-season stuff. So things to remember is, you need to check your team regularly for injuries and news. So all the way up to game time. So you can change your team, each player until game is kicked off. So, the Saturday kickoffs at 6 o'clock, or sorry, the Sunday kickoff at 6 o'clock. You could change any player that's on that team up to 6 o'clock. The same with the 9 o'clock, the same with the 1 o'clock, etc., etc., etc. So do check into the app. A lot of those injuries are going to be known in advance of the following game, but there are some things that happen just before game time that we're unaware of. So the in-app services are usually really, really helpful to make sure that you're not starting a player who isn't playing, and at least you can do a last-minute change-up. So make sure you do that. Check the waiver wire as well. So after every week, inevitably there's going to be somebody who has an absolutely sensational game somewhere, and there's going to be a huge hype over them, so potentially worth looking in there, see if anybody is showing value versus what their ADP is. Maybe didn't get picked up, you could bring them into the team, swap out some of your injured guys or defunct guys. Trades can happen, so you can trade with other players. The only thing I'll say is that it will need to be approved by the rest of the members of the league. I think there's a 2-day window for trades, so if I want to swap 2 players with I don't know, Josh, and he gives me 2 players in reverse, like if I trade him Saquon Barkley and Justin Jefferson for who's some punters the best, so Devontae Booker and who's some nobody, so Matt Stafford or someone like that, that I don't think that's a fair trade. They kind of need to be a similar caliber, so there may be a question over whether or not the group will approve that, because we don't want outside interests influencing games and teams and stuff. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Hopefully it doesn't. But yeah, look, hopefully we'll keep everybody honest. I typically don't get too many trades in the season, but there might be 1 or 2, so just keep an eye out for that as well. One thing I'm looking forward to is a lot of shit talking across the app, so please do so. If somebody is doing particularly well or particularly crap, please highlight it to the rest of the group, because that'll be quite entertaining. And the big thing to remember is, I know there's a lot of new people in the group this year, and there's a lot of people who haven't played fantasy football before, but the season is long, right? And a bad start, a bad draft is not the end of the world. You can rectify it very, very quickly. So inevitably what will happen is, I'd say in about half the teams that are drafted after week 1 or week 2, there's going to be a massive injury in that team, and they're going to have to restructure what's going on, and you will see a huge amount of churn on the waiver wire. Typically teams don't actually start getting up to be productive until sort of week 5 or 6 anyway. I know there's a preseason, but the preseason is really just to get rid of some of the cobwebs, try out some of the guys who are on the roster before they get cut. But don't give up hope if you accidentally draft 4 people who are all injured that you weren't aware of. The waiver is there, so you can go in there, pick up some of those guys fairly early on. If they don't start producing from week 1 or things have changed internally, there's an opportunity to move around as well. So pretty much every season that I have ever played in, I have drafted okay, and then inevitably one of my best players goes down, and then I kind of come up with an option 2. You may not be able to get the top guys, but you'll definitely be able to pick up those middle guys who were maybe overlooked in the draft after week 1 and 2 and week 3. So don't give hope up so early. And the last piece of advice I'd give you, it's not really a huge amount to do with fantasy football, but I definitely recommend it, is to watch the league. The league is about a group of friends, comedy, who do fantasy footballs. I don't know actually what channel it's on. You'd probably have to go on the interweb to get a stream of it, but it's quite entertaining, and there'll be a lot of references to it for the people who've been in fantasy football leagues for a while, so definitely worthwhile watching it if you want to entertain yourself and be part of a sort of the ongoing jokes about Chilipa Batman or Shiva Kamini Kandahar, which will mean nothing to half of you, but hopefully it will the other guys. All right. So look, final bits and pieces here, right? So some resources, obviously the fantasynfl.com is your primary source. We didn't click into it there earlier on, but if you go to the homepage of that, there are a ton of videos, and I mean there's like 10 videos every day that they churn out about, you know, the top wide receivers, the top sleepers, the top running backs, you know, rookies to avoid, rookies to pick. You know, you'll be thrown around 100 different ways, but you'll definitely get an insight into a lot of the things that the professionals are looking at. As I said, there's a network in the US dedicated to this, to fantasy football, so there's a lot of people covering it, so well worth doing. Go through YouTube, search Fantasy NFL, and there is again a ton of resources there. You're going to get guys who have this as their profession. They have guys who are just sharing their experiences. You've got noobs on there. You've got like anything under the sun, advice, tips, everything. Well worth checking out. Social, as I said, look at Twitter. Instagram's probably not the right one, or Facebook probably not the right channels to do for it, but Twitter will give you a lot of insight. So if you're following the likes of Ian Rappaport, to give you all the insight of what's going on in contract talks or politics that we talked about earlier on, potentially injuries too, but then also, you know, follow your favorite players. You know, if they have an Instagram account or a Twitter account, definitely worth watching them on Twitter to see if anything pops up, because or even guys that you're looking at on the waiver wire that potentially you might pick up in future, because you'll be amazed what you'll pick up as little nuggets of information out there. And the last thing then is podcasts. There are an absolute ton of podcasts out there. I'm not even going to suggest that there is only one or two. The one I like listening to, because it is UK based, is the Undrafted. The guys there are just full of knowledge, like absolutely. They recently did a series there about each division across the NFL as well. So they went sort of AFC, North, South, East, West, and then they went to the NFC, North, South, East, West. They went through every team, and then went through all the bits and pieces about how they improved the roster, what they lost, where they think they'll finish up. But most importantly, at the end of every single one of those things, they came up with a suggestion or some advice about what player to pick up as part of your fantasy. But beyond the actual pickup part, I think it's hugely valuable to understand more about the teams that certain players are working on. So for example, Najee Harris, I'm pretty sure they talked about the terrible O-line that the Steelers have, and how they're not going to be able to punch holes open for Najee Harris to run through. So, you know, incredibly talented running back, but is he going to be productive? Probably not, unless he's able to overcome all that and create his own holes. So yeah, so look, that's pretty much it. As I said, this wasn't meant to be sort of a deep dive into anything. It's really just a high level overview of what to expect from the draft, in advance of the draft, etc, etc, etc. Please do share your thoughts. If you're watching this on YouTube, actually put any resources that you think are valuable into the comment section below, so anybody who watches this will be able to see them in future. It'll be really good. But by all means, if there's anything else you want to share, put it into the comment section there. But also, if you're part of the fantasy break, which this is obviously designed for, the other 30 people that are in this, you can share it on the WhatsApp groups as well, which will be pretty good. But yeah, look, really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Really excited, the football season kicking off again, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks a million for joining, and talk to you all later.